Nadya Hazboun. I'm a fashion designer from Bethlehem. I studied interactive and communication media in the Czech Republic. I finished my master's degree there. And then I pursued my dream to study fashion design in the London College of Fashion in London, in the UK. I'm 30 years old. I just came back to Palestine about half a year ago. And I moved my brand, which I established in the Czech Republic. I moved it right now to Palestine, and I'm hoping I will grow it locally. On an international level, the fashion world is known to have three basic categories that we designers like to sort of feel we belong to, okay? The biggest one, born in Paris, is haute couture, which is basically the highest type of fashion that you can actually find anywhere. When you buy an haute couture piece, you're really investing a whole amount of money. You are very much aware of what type of fabrics they are giving you. Every single bead, every single piece on that dress is handmade, is finished by hand, which is very particular to haute couture. So this is like the royalty of the fashion world is haute couture. And then we have the prêt-à-porter, I'm sorry for my French, which is the ready-to-wear. In a sense, it is a toned-down version of haute couture, where you have clothing that is customized, that is actually made to fit. The third category of fashion is what we see every day on the streets, around us, in the shops. It's basically mass production or commercial fashion. It's very important to know that commercial fashion is actually a copied version of what goes down the runway, what the main international designers actually design. So companies that mass produce, they're basically creating or reproducing higher fashion and translating it in a way that can work on the streets. So the design process is a very beautiful process, and the first step of this process is what they call being kissed by a muse. And it's exactly that, because at a moment where you get the inspiration, where you get the idea, it's as if some very big energy has given you something. And that is the moment where you actually start developing that idea and making it grow with you. From this step, we move into step number 2, and that step is basically throwing your idea on paper and sketching it. The sketching process is a very nice one and very complicated, because you have to think about all the aspects of the clothing where you conceptualize the idea. This, however, is very connected to step number 3, in which you start drafting the pattern. In drafting the pattern, you try to think about the technical part of the clothing and giving your clothes the functionality or the possibility of functioning correctly. This moves us into step number 4, which is a very beautiful step, and it's getting very close to the final stage of the creation. In this stage, we cut and sew and draft the piece of cloth, the fabric, and transform it into a piece of clothing, thanks to the other steps that we used so far. And this takes us to the last step, which is my personal favorite, in which we actually test the clothing. We see how it functions and accordingly fine-tune the details. if we look back at history, fashion has always been reflecting where you're from, where you come from, your, let's say, social status. Particularly if we study the Palestinian costume, traditional costume, the thobe, we realize that every stitch, every color has a significance, that it exactly tells us where this woman comes from, her social status, like is she a villager, is she from the town, from the city, etc. So nowadays we have changed a little bit let's say the value that fashion shows, in the sense that it stopped putting so much importance on the social status and on the origin, and it started reflecting a more individual image of the person choosing this kind of fashion. The nice thing about the Palestinian fashion scene or fashion market is that there is no like one group that represents the whole society, because we have diverse groups in the society and each group has their own fashion trends. These trends do move from one group to the other in one way, but the market is very, very diverse. The color trends differ from one group to the other, what they prefer, what they are willing to wear, how bold these people are, because you would be surprised sometimes that certain groups are bolder in their clothing than others, which you would not expect. So I think the Palestinian fashion market is a very interesting one. My former collection that most people know was inspired by my travels, but also was inspired by an inner conflict where I was actually looking for freedom. So a lot of it was about like, where's home? Where do I want to go? It was also connected to me thinking if I'm coming back to Palestine, if I want to stay in Europe. So a lot of the fabrics that are used actually reflect freedom and symbols of freedom. So you see dresses or tops with birds representing freedom. We can fly. You can see feathers a lot in the collection, which apart from looking good and being glamorous, which I love, the feathers do symbolize literally freedom. So that means a lot to me. Chiffons, silk are other fabrics that are flowy, that give the person who wears this garment a lot of freedom, a lot of, let's say, freedom of movement, which was connected also to my journey, where you travel, you're free to travel, which you do not have in Palestine. So there was that conflict of, okay, I will go back to Palestine, and will I have this freedom? Will I lose it? Am I compromising it? So this whole, let's say, mental process that I was going through was reflected in my fabric choices, in the patterns on the fabrics. And what I love to always say is I love to dress women who are glamorous, who like to stand out, who like to come into the room and show their personality. I don't want my piece to come into the room and not be noticed. I design for women who want to be noticed. So using fabrics like that have gold colors, or that have sequins, or that have glitters and glamours and beads and all of that, it's just something that maybe comes from my Palestinian background, where I like to go over the top. When I had the show in Amman, and a lot of my clothing was casual, a lot of my clothing was inspired by a hint of my Palestinian background, but did not really carry the strong messages that my clothing now carries. So I figured it would be beneficial for me to go down the runway with something that screamed Palestinian, that's something that screamed Bethlehem, that's something that reflected who I am. And I started thinking, what's very typical of Bethlehem, what's very typical of Palestine? And I looked around and I was like, olive wood. Everybody comes to Bethlehem to buy olive wood. You can see a lot of pieces in my showroom, and maybe one of the most pieces that were famous were the bangles. Bangles that I've created basically were the most prominent pieces on the runway when they went down the runway. The nice thing about them was that they carried quotes by Palestinian poets like Fadwa Tuqan, Mahmoud Darwish, Samih al-Qasim. I had also like earrings with Edward Said saying. So there I took my accessories to another level where I stopped only using the olive wood, but I also started promoting Palestinian literature and Palestinian culture for the world to know that we are craftsmen, we work in olive wood, we do really nice things, our finish is really nice. We also have a very rich culture that you know nothing about. When you look at me, fashion is what expresses who I am, and I think this is what fashion should be for every single person out there. Fashion is about taste. You cannot meet everybody's taste, so it has to be clear from the beginning of your journey that whatever you do, you have to stay true to yourself. And always keep in mind that we are Palestinians, and at the end, any type of art or work we do should, in one way or another, serve our case. Bring out the message out there, because we can do it in ways that are different than the ways that other people have tried to get our message out there. I have, on my personal level, managed to bring a lot of awareness about Palestinian literature to the Western world. And I think a lot of other people can do it in other methods and other ways. And I do think it's important that our generation does that. So that's my biggest message to them.